Today's August 30, 2024, and I'm honored to have on the show the prince, the king, the ruler of Jupplandia, Daniel Jupp. Daniel, tell us, where is Jupplandia, and would you rather be there currently than the United Kingdom?
Undoubtedly, I'd rather be there. Yeah, Jupplandia is my Substack. It's the name of my Substack, and vaingloriously and with a touch of megalomania, I turned my surname into the name of a country, an imaginary country, and that's under that name that I post my Substacks.
Why would you rather be in Jupplandia than the United Kingdom? Rather than talk about Jupplandia per se, but what's going on in the United Kingdom? I made a mistake. I was playing tennis with a couple. We were playing doubles with friends, and I made some reference to their being English. They're like, "No, we're Scottish."
Yeah, that is a bad mistake to make. They don't appreciate that. But what's going on in England? Well, obviously we've had our election, and a full 20% of the eligible voting public wanted the government we've got now, and so we had this huge majority for the Labour Party, mainly because the collapse of the Conservative vote and the fact that half the Conservative vote went to Reform, the new Alternative Party. And what that's left us with is with this huge Labour majority that can do effectively whatever they wish for the next 5 years. And boy, have they started off at a pace doing whatever they wish, because we had yet another incident of innocent people being harmed by either asylum seekers or second generation immigrants or immigrants. And we had 3 young children, very sadly, were murdered, stabbed in a place called Southport. And in response to that, we had what are classified by the mainstream media and by the government as far right riots. Anyone who's actually looked into it knows that what that means is that finally, after 60 years of mass immigration and successive governments ignoring their feelings on it and increasing crime and danger on our streets, the working class white people in our country finally got to the point that people like Black Lives Matter get to a lot sooner, and created public disturbances. But if you've looked at online coverage of this, you'll have seen not the kind of coverage that's given by mainstream news. You'll have seen that virtually everyone that's been arrested, and we had a wave of arrests in response to this, and we had very draconian responses with up to 1,000 people now have been very quickly processed, very quickly charged, very quickly found guilty, and put away for very long sentences. And it's very similar to what happened with J6, because the government presentation of what happened and the mainstream media presentation of what happened is completely divorced from the reality. There were people who were shouting and swearing at the police. There was some property damage, but it was much smaller from the white working class than previous Black Lives Matter riots have been, or previous ethnic-based riots like the riots we had some years ago in response to the Duggan incident. So what we've been told is that that we've just had this terrible far right explosion, and the government clamped down on it, and that's all kind of fine and dandy, and we still live in a democracy. And really what the reality is that people have been arrested who've had no previous interaction with the police, no criminal record, never been involved in trouble or violence before. And those people have been arrested for things like social media posts and things they've said online, if those things have been against mass immigration, if those things have been against immigrants or asylum seekers, and if those things have been non-PC in nature. And, you know, many of these people are much closer to say, the grannies that entered the Capitol building and were then treated so badly by the Biden administration. You know, but what we're told is that they're all hardened far-right thugs. Our new hard left Prime Minister gave a series of, you know, stern declarations and public addresses in which he basically characterized anyone who opposes mass immigration as a Nazi, and, you know, justified the completely draconian responses from the courts and from the judges and from the police. Now, that clamped down the, you know, what violence there was. But if you've looked at online coverage, you saw that, for example, there were huge Muslim gangs involved, and they went through town centres, they terrorised anyone they found who was white, and they inflicted violence on several kind of white victims. There was no public address about that. There was no outcry about that. The media and the government carried on pretending that all of these gatherings, all of this disturbance was initiated by the far right, who were, of course, white. So, you know, there's been this kind of complete dishonest fabrication on the whole thing. And the closest analogy is to J6. You know, since then, we had, you know, this draconian response certainly calmed down the streets. But then we had the Notting Hill Carnival. The Notting Hill Carnival obviously is a celebration of black culture in the UK, supposedly. That always generates multiple arrests, multiple stabbings, multiple violent incidents, and it's described by our media and by our you know, new Prime Minister and everyone of his type as a kind of wonderful celebration of everything that makes Britain worthy and noble. There was actually more violence at the Notting Hill Carnival than there was at the Southport riots, but you'd never believe that following our media. You know, so the accusations that have come out since are that we now live in a system of two-tier policing, and we live in a system where if it's a protest by white people, especially white working class people, it will be treated to the full force of the law, and it will be, you know, there'll be police tactics like kettling, there'll be police charges against these people, and, you know, there'll be very quickly the kind of responses that we have never seen in response to groups like Black Lives Matter. Again, this is following the template established in the US, really, because, you know, when we had the months and months of rioting while President Trump was in power, from black protesters and from white leftist protesters, that was treated by the media and by the political establishment completely differently to the J6 events. So, you know, all of these things are basically the UK copying the US. But in the UK, of course, we don't have constitutional protections at all. So a hard left government that decides to be completely in favour of one group and completely against another group, especially when they have this huge majority that they've just gained and very little real opposition in Parliament, can effectively govern in different ways for different groups of people, which is what they're doing.
Well, it's sad and shocking. I saw some pictures of the Notting Hill Carnival. I might put them up a little bit. Is there any recourse? I mean, sometimes governments fall, but it doesn't sound like this one can, because they have you know, what percentage of Parliament do they have under their
I
belt?
think that's part of the problem, because we've only just had an election, so they're newly in. They've been in power 2 months. They're already disastrous, and in things like polling, we see that they're already a hated government, and quickly become a hated government within 2 months of being elected. And that's partly because, as I say, they were elected on just a tiny fragment of the overall vote. Double the number of people didn't vote at all as voted for the Labour Party. There's 40% of the eligible vote chose to stay at home and not vote at all, and 20% of the eligible vote voted for the Labour Party. So they had no real democratic mandate. Democracy becomes a farce when you get to those levels where double the number of people aren't taking part as the people that vote for the government that gets in. So that's a problem, and it's a problem which they don't seem to worry about in the least, because they've got legally now 5 years where they can rule for 5 years without needing to call another election. And look at polling, their popularity is absolutely crashed in response to people seeing that there's this two-tier policing, seeing that the government that's got in is going to rule completely regardless of any kind of sense of justice or fairness. And Keir Starmer, the new Prime Minister's personal approval rating has dropped by 26 points in 2 months. So it's a massive crash in popularity, but that has no real effect for them because they don't care. And they've got 5 years to try and rig the system in time for the next election to get in, even if they're hated. And they've seen very effective rigging in the US. They've seen the Brazilian election was just stolen. They've seen that Macron can have very low popularity levels himself and still be in power in France. And Macron has ruled for years with ongoing riots again and again and again, and deeply unpopular with the majority of people in the country. So we're getting to the stage now where globalist leaders are so confident of their ability to rig systems and so contemptuous of democracy itself that they don't really fear the electorate in any way whatsoever, and they don't fear becoming unpopular with the electorate, because the elections are a rubber stamp on who's already been chosen to rule.
Yeah, it's a horrible situation. And you guys don't have any First Amendment or Second Amendment, because there's nothing to which to amend. You don't have a constitution to begin with.
Well, we have an unwritten constitution, and we're supposed to have common law, but and the common law was a brilliant way of expressing the power of the people and making sure that the ruling elite were constrained in some ways. But the common law has increasingly been ignored, and is especially ignored by our lawyers and by our by our professional judicial class. So, we did have traditional protections in place, but they were protections that effectively also needed a certain degree of honesty and integrity on the part of our rulers, which is long since gone. So, the system only works if people are honestly using the system. And that's not been the case for a long time. And, we had the, Magna Carta, we had the 1688 Bill of Rights. We had various forms of protection that actually inspired the founders of the United States of America. But it doesn't really help you if those things are simply ignored. And it doesn't help you if you have a political class that doesn't care about any of those features whatsoever. And that's the situation we're in.
There's also, you don't really have checks and balances. I mean, democracy can be a brutal system. I mention this all the time, but democracy is three wolves and a sheep voting on dinner. And what you need is a republic as a kind of preservation of the rights of the minority.
Well, this is an interesting thing, because I always get into this disagreement with Americans, and I think that I think the Constitution is a beautiful document and one of the best expressions of the spirit of democracy ever written. And I think and it did for many years protect Americans in a practical sense. I don't think it protects them as much as Americans still believe it does, because you've got the First Amendment and you've got protections of free speech that are supposed to be constitutionally there. But at the same time, you effectively had the Biden administration outsourcing censorship, outsourcing an industrial complex of censorship and propaganda to supposedly private entities. So and we just had with the letter that Mark Zuckerberg wrote, one of the agents of this acknowledging that it happened. Mark Zuckerberg recently wrote a letter where he said, yes, the Biden administration applied pressure to Facebook. Yes, there were things that we knew were true. And yes, we censored them on behalf of the government. And he was complaining about this and complaining about the level of pressure that had been put on him. And, we should remember that this is someone who massively funded the Democrats, gave over, somewhere around $400 million to them. And his money was used to seize control of part of the electoral process. But even he is saying now that, the Biden administration went too far and effectively got round constitutional protections on free speech by outsourcing and pressuring censorship on private companies. So yes, there's the protection there, but it's not working as effectively as Americans might think it is.
No doubt. But as Winston Churchill once said, he's mentioned capitalism as the worst economic system on earth, except for all the others.
Yeah.
I think we might very well be, no offense to short people, but we might very well be the tallest dwarf. And so they're all not living up to standards, all these governments. But what we seem, again, a little bit like reserve.
I think we are now, we are now all midgets, and the biggest midgets are the people that lead us. It's kind of a redundant argument for like Americans and citizens of the UK to say to each other, well, my nation's a little bit more free than your nation, because neither nation is free, and that's the problem. And
Absolutely.
The entirety of what was the free world and was the place where people would flee to in order to have basic freedoms, and now ruled by people, globalists, who want to take away all of those basic freedoms unless you conform entirely to what they believe. And all the European nations are suffering from it. The US is suffering from it. Canada is suffering from it. Australia and New Zealand are suffering from it. We saw how many freedoms they're prepared to take away during the COVID years, but now we see that they want this to be the kind of normal way things operate, even when they don't have the excuse of a pandemic. And it's a terrifying thing that people should be much more worried about than most of us are.
I mean, where does one go?
Well, I've seen that Putin, is very good at effectively trolling the West, and he's right a lot of the times when he does. And there's now no way in which someone could objectively say we are more free than Russia, because, for example, more people have been arrested for politically incorrect posts that the government doesn't like in the UK, charged and prosecuted for those thought crimes and speech crimes, than have fallen foul of similar laws enacted by Putin. There's actually fewer people in Russian prison cells because they said something Putin didn't like than there are in British prison cells because they said something the British government didn't like. I don't want to be saying this. I'm no fan of Russia particularly, or of Putin particularly, but that's objectively the case. But in one of his trolling efforts, he's apparently offered to relax Russian immigration laws for people who no longer feel that the West is safe for them, and no longer feel that they want to carry on living in the West and would prefer to go to Russia. We've seen more famous, more prominent people flee to Russia now who aren't, as in the old days of the Soviet Union, people who were spies or people who were communists. We've had people who flee there who were, rape victims of Democrat politicians, for example. So, the old idea, and the comforting old idea, that the West is where freedom lives and freedom survives, and where other people come to us for shelter, no longer applies.
I've heard that people are thinking about, buying property, or many, not just thinking, buying property in Hungary, for instance. But on the other hand, Viktor Orban, who's wanted to maintain Hungary for Hungarians, may be, I guess, open to that concept. But on the other hand, he's being fined 250 million euros a month or something like that. I don't know, some zillion dollar amount for not opening his borders to the mass immigration that's coming in. So is he going to be able to sustain this? What is wrong with leaders wanting to help their own citizens?
Yeah.
When did that get out of style?
It's been. If we're going kind of seriously about when it went out of style, you have to look to World War II, and what happened as a consequence of World War II was the kind of natural patriotism that existed beforehand, and the assumption that looking out for your own citizens is the priority of government, was destroyed effectively by World War II, World War I and World War II, but primarily World War II. And because the people who took charge of the narrative immediately in the aftermath of World War II were internationalists. They were people who preferred international solutions to national ones, and they were in many cases Marxists who wanted to characterize all nationalism as the same as Nazism. And the horrors of Nazism allowed them to do that, and people was kind of immediately forgot, under the kind of direction of Marxist historians in particular. People immediately forgot that it was nationalism that defeated Nazism. It wasn't this. It wasn't the League of Nations that defeated Nazism, or transnational bodies that defeated Nazism. It was armies of men who today would be called far right, who were on the whole, conservative with a small c, very patriotic, going to war, prepared to fight and kill, to defend their nations and to, respond to aggression from another nation. Nationalism defeated Nazism. That's even the case with Russia and with communist nations, because, in order to motivate their people, in order to get them to fight, the communist Russians used nationalist rhetoric and nationalist imagery. So the idea that nationalism was tainted by World War II was a lie that was put to people by Marxist historians, and they were very effective in making that the standard teaching of our schools. And that was a precursor to all the rhetoric that came out from most anti-colonialism. It was a precursor to things like critical race theory and cultural Marxist attitudes to Western history. And it was something that the Soviets were deliberately manipulating and advancing in order to, exploit divisions in the West and win the Cold War. Our educational establishment ran with it and, was soon dominated by leftists. So that's where a lot of the problem of why people think it's good to do so many things that are damaging to their own nations. That's where it derives from.
So, question is, how do we undo that kind of horrible, miserable feeling of self, or is it or end stage for Europe or Germans or whatever, as seeing themselves as that?
Yeah, I mean, Germany's very odd, isn't it? Because they've had the kind of post-Nazi guilt, and they became, in many ways, the kind of wokest of the Europeans, and the Europeans are generally, more woke than many Americans or Brits have been, and they went all in for this kind of self-hatred, which you could understand given the legacy of Nazism. But for countries like Canada or the US or the UK or Australia, it's a lot odder that we've gone all in on self-hatred. But there are various reasons for it, and there are psychological reasons, there are economic and financial reasons as well. Psychologically, if you're saying that everyone in the past was worse than you, and it's only the people in your social circle at this particular time who are truly enlightened and truly get it, and are, the original meaning of the term woke was they invented it themselves, as more aware of social injustice, and you're inherently a better person than other people around you according to that ideology. And the way you manifest how good you are, the way you get that little thrill of feeling better than everyone else, which is like a dopamine hit to straight to the brain, is by hating your own people to an excessive degree. And this is what Orwell talked about in relation to the British intellectual class, 60, 70 years ago. And it's something that through the leftist control of education has been spread and broadened throughout society more generally. And it's a luxury belief, and it's also an identifying belief of the ruling class and the media class. Now, you have to assume that the Western world, there's nothing special about it. It wasn't better than other places before. It is, that there is this kind of cultural relativism, which will always allow you to point out the ills of the Western societies in the past, and concentrate on those exclusively, whilst never acknowledging that other cultures did the same thing. So, for example, the cultural Marxist interpretation of the history of slavery, and the fact that the abolishing slavery, especially as a kind of global enterprise and as a slave trade that functioned internationally, was a Western invention. But suddenly, supposedly, the West is supposed to take on the burden of not just the majority of the guilt, but exclusively the burden of guilt for the existence of slavery, which existed in all human societies in one form or another for millennia, including obviously all the non-white ones. So this self-hatred is something that obviously has been promoted and spread by our enemies externally, obviously played a part in welcoming some of those enemies into our nations, and was funded by the Soviets in the past, and this self-hatred has been funded by Arab nations more recently, and explains the devotion of university students for Hamas. You follow the money, and people who want the West to fall have funded this stuff. The West had a psychological crisis following both world wars, no longer believed in itself, its leaders no longer believed in it, and it became a marker of being a better person, and certainly a marker to get into the ruling classes, to actually despise your own history and despise your own people. And unfortunately, that's the situation that the white working class or ordinary people in Western nations are now under, where for generations now their ruling class has been taught to hate them and hate their history, and to see no reason to protect them, and to actually work towards their amelioration or destruction.
We have these places like England or the Netherlands or whatever, and it seems like they're being homeopathically succussed to the extent that you keep diluting what's there, banging it a lot, and then it's not the same thing that you thought it was there. So in a sense, maybe it's kind of like this movie The Men in Black, where these shapes that look like the being, but in fact they're populated by something else. So that
well, we've got. I mean, it is all. If it was a kind of homeopathic problem in that sense, the dilution of the original peoples of Western nations wouldn't be as big a threat as it is. It's not that tiny parts are being added to a solution. It's that huge parts are being added to a solution, which then changes it into an entirely different thing altogether.
Yeah.
Look, the basic fact is that no culture in history has had the levels of mass immigration that Western nations now are told that is normal and told that they should welcome. And I'm not really aware of many cultures where the ruling class has been enthusiastically pressing for the mass replacement of their own populace. That doesn't really happen. That normally happens. You get massive demographic change when people are brutally conquered by an external enemy, or you get massive demographic change over much longer periods of time. You don't get this kind of concentrated and deliberate change of populations from within, and conducted from its own leaders and supported by its own leaders. And it takes a kind of massive level of distortion of what the duties of government should be, and what makes a good leader, to get to that point where leaders now think, I'm a good person because I've added another 1 million refugees to my nation. Previously people would have been, my duty as the leader of my nation is to protect my people, my existing people, from massive influxes of this kind. Trump has that traditional conception. All of the globalist leaders have the modern new idea that their job is to massively replace a population, an existing population that disappoints them, rather than actually doing what that population.
It seems to me that it's just a matter of getting the populace that you want to keep yourself in charge. And so, at some level, democracy, I hate to think of it this way, but is democracy a problem?
No, it's very similar in a way to, is capitalism the problem? When we look at corporatism, and we look at corrupt corporations and how they've entangled themselves in regulatory bodies, as Robert F. Kennedy talks about quite a lot, and how that they work with these huge companies work with the state to act as their censorship arm, or to do things that are against the interests of the common people. What you're seeing in both cases, what you're seeing with that kind of corporatism in the business world, in relation to capitalism, and what you're seeing in our supposed democracies in the West today, is not so much a problem with the original, a problem with how these things operated when they were operating properly. You're seeing what happens when these systems are taken over by soulless, utterly corrupt entities who have no sense of loyalty to a particular place or a particular nation or a particular people. It's not so much that democracy is to blame for this. It's the corruption of democracy that is to blame for this. And, people trying to rig democracy against the interests of the people. I wouldn't blame democracy itself any more than I'd blame the free exchange of goods for current corporations being incredibly malign.
But it still seems like what they're looking for here is voters. This is the great replacement theory,
Well, yeah, I mean but it's not even that they need to look for voters, because what they were looking for is a way to rig the system, and because of the checks and balances you've got in place to try and prevent a tyranny of the majority. Actually, those balances have their own problems, because, for example, one of the reasons that Democrats are so in favour of opening the borders and letting in lots of people is that they know that those people will go to Democrat regions. They will be welcomed into Democrat regions, and then those regions, based on an assessment of population, will have a higher electoral college vote.
Something was brought up in the course of Western civilization, and the West being, kind of this European sense, is kind of like the current malaise, godlessness.
Yeah, you need for democracy to work, it has to apply to a specific people, because there has to be that sense of kinship. And you can have immigration and you can have people joining from elsewhere, but there has to be this essential notion that people are joining something which is akin to a family, an extended family, and which has genuine characteristics of its own that are unique and pertain only to that people. There has to be a Frenchness to France, there has to be a Germanness to Germany, and there has to be an Englishness to England. You cannot retain that if your ruling class think that Germanness is an evil concept, or Englishness is an evil concept, or Americanness is an evil concept. And you cannot have that if, there's no impetus towards people to integrate and to join with what's already the existing majority there, and, to conform to their culture and morals. All you have then is a place. You don't have a nation. You don't, you have a place that might have a state that calls itself a nation, but really that becomes just the most powerful robbers and bandits in your land. It doesn't become a community of communities knit together by shared characteristics.
Spend the money, get to the Super Bowl, and guess what? The Chiefs and the 49ers are playing, and even if some Jets happen to be in the crowd or some of them get on the field, they can't win the game.
Yeah.
Unless they somehow overrun both of those teams that have, so it's in a binary system. It's hard to be non-binary.
Yeah, apathy is not the solution, and just saying you can't divorce yourself from the system that you're trapped within. You know, I can understand the instinct to retreat, and I can understand the disappointment with every side. And, you know, I went from being a regular Conservative voter to deciding that the Conservative Party was regularly betraying everything that was actually Conservative. So I could no longer vote for them. But I still voted, and I voted for reform. You have to either create or take part in something new if everything that is old betrays you. You know, just saying a pox on all their houses is a pathetic response, really. And, you know, although I can understand the kind of the things that lead to it, it's not going to save anyone. It's not going to help anyone. And, you know, voting might not save anyone or help anyone. But we do what we can. And, you know, speaking the truth might not save anyone, but we do what we can. You know, just complete abnegation of your own responsibility to be a social animal in the political system you live within is not going to improve anything for anyone. That's why I will still vote, even with the horrified perception that my vote is going to be meaningless. And I don't think I'm endorsing a corrupt system when I vote. And I think probably people who say don't do anything are doing more harm than people who say, well, try that. It probably won't work.
Leaving, you know, the frying pan going into the fire, you know, you have 5 years of Keir Starmer, it seems, or his replacement. Can you survive? You as a
my answer to that, we might not survive. We might not survive 5 years of Keir Starmer. America might not survive another, you know, Kamala being elected. And, you know, there are instances where clearly an alternative vote is a wasted vote. If you're, you know, voting for, I know libertarians, you know, I sympathise with a lot of their positions, but if you're voting for a candidate that's going to get 2% of the vote overall, you're not going to go anywhere. So for a very long time, people in Britain were kind of voting for the Conservatives as the lesser of two evils. But what that meant is that we had years and years and years where we could have protected ourselves from what Starmer is doing now, and we didn't. And, you know, if you look at the tyrannical measures that Keir Starmer has been putting in, he has been arresting people for social media posts. Well, the legislation that allows him to do that was brought in under the last Conservative government, the Online Harms Act. So, you know, you cannot vote for either one of those in those circumstances. So, you know, I don't believe in apathy, but I don't believe in continually voting for one of the two main parties simply because you think they're the only ones that can get in. You know, you've got to do something different to both of those responses. But, you know, would you vote for Mitt Romney? I would find it very difficult to vote for Mitt Romney.
That's the trick. So Charlie Baker was up, and I've got some, you know, kind of purist conservative friends, you know, who can't vote for Mitt Romney when he was running for governor and or president and whatnot. And the question is, you know, against Obama, you know, Mitt Romney, again, it's a Super Bowl. You know, you vote for the Chiefs, you know, you root for the Chiefs, you root for the 49ers. You don't get to root for the Jets and expect anything other than one of those other two teams to win. And so Charlie Baker and Mitt Romney, you know, Mitt Romney running against Obama is a better choice. Mitt Romney running against, I forget, you know.
But it's the same. It's the same as the Conservatives in the UK. What you get is exactly the same stuff you get under the, you know, the thing you're afraid of, but a little bit slower. There's not much practical difference. Mitt Romney would have done, you know, would have done many of the things that Obama did.
I understand, but at least the Conservatives have a chance of listening to you. They have a chance of being chagrined and you know, use the word Reform Party, reforming themselves and absorbing the Reform Party. They could make a coalition with Reform. Had things gone a little bit differently, say, and you have this parliamentary system, and let's say everyone got 33, 30%, whatever, of the total number of seats, and then theoretically, conservatives ally with reform rather than, that would be the natural pairing.
Yeah.
You have
Well,
a party
but if you look at what we've had this new Labour government come in, and the Tories lost a lot of seats to Reform, and Reform were the ones selling themselves as more populist and as more conservative with a small c, and any sensible strategist from the Conservative Party would say, look, we've been hammered because we've been supporting globalism and because we've been doing exactly the same things as the left-wing parties, and people don't like it and they've hammered us for it and we're out. Clearly we have to move right again, and we have to be more populist, and we have to listen to the people who aren't being listened to because they're our voters and they've gone away from us. That's not what the Conservative Party have done. They've got, I think, 121 MPs still. Not one of those MPs has offered any serious condemnation of the things that Keir Starmer has been doing. Not one of them has stood up and said, actually, this is tyranny. Not one of them has honestly said, there is two-tier policing. It is going on. It is unjust. They've offered no kind of concerted opposition to what Labour is doing because they have exactly the same ideas, because they're also globalists, and they're also people who have a contempt for the white working class, and they're also, these middle class, remote types who have no connection with ordinary people and no sense of loyalty to their nation and its people. They're what little they did when they were in office was clearly things that weren't going to solve any of the problems, and the problem of mass immigration. And they were bringing in legislation that is now used for tyranny by the Labour Party. So, there's no benefit to staying with them, ultimately, in the end. Yes, the kind of the Labour Party or the Democrats in the US will do the insane things quicker. But when the official right will do the insane things as well, you have to change the official right or destroy them. That's what the MAGA movement hopefully will do. And, that's what Trump taking over the Republican Party.
Maybe you could survive jumping from one-story building of Keir Starmer. You just, do one of those parkour tumbles, and you roll out and you're all fine. You jump up in a somersault, and then you wave to the crowd. And so with 2 stories, you have to be a little more talented. Maybe you land on a good patch of grass. So 2 years of Keir Starmer. 3 years would make it a 3-story building. So now you're jumping from the 3rd story. You're most likely going to be hurt.
I'd rather have an honest assessment of the gap and a chance to leap than go with, again, the guy who says everything's okay, just stand here, I'll protect you, and then you get stabbed anyway. And that's what the official right has been, in bed with the other side, taking their money, going to dinner with them, playing golf with them, involved in the same social circles. The official right sold out, and they sold out a long time ago, and they're either scared or they're bought or both. And there comes a breaking point where you can't go with them anymore, even though it's the lesser of two evils. And the advantage that America has, the beauty that America has, is that Trump got himself inside the Republican Party. So one of the 2 main parties, and the MAGA movement got inside the Republican Party, and effectively, has tried to force it to be Republican again, and tried to force it to care about its nation and care about saving its nation. That gives Americans more options than Brits have at the moment. Well, but if there's nothing like that, if there's nothing like that kind of populist infiltration of a right that's betrayed its voters in your official party of the right, then you have to go to a new party.
Yeah. I think the other thing, though, is, again, we have this, sort of tricameral system with the justice, legislative, and the executive branches, and you are more unicameral as the parliament. You have, this bit of a upper house of lords, and you have a bit of monarchy and so forth, but just call it parliament, prime minister. That's it. And our Congress, which is, I guess, most nearly similar to your parliament, the lower house is every 2 years. So there's always going to be a kind of a greater responsiveness to the popular will. So if, let's say, Obama gets elected, or when he got elected in 2008, he can kind of carry on like Keir Starmer does for 2 years. And then 2010, he gets a huge, slap down. The same thing happened to Bill Clinton. He wanted to do Obamacare, Hillary Care at the time, and then he got slapped down by Newt Gingrich's, what do we call it, Promise to America, I forget the name of it. And so that's 2 years later. You get that kind of slap down. You have to kind of move to the middle, and you have to listen to.
Well, there's an argument that says that, and I can see that argument, and I can see it making sense. But Imperial Rome had elections every year. The tribunes were elected every year. So they had much more frequent elections than us. Were they more democratic than Western nations 20 years ago? Of course not. Were they more free? Was the Roman citizen more free than a Western national citizen 20 years ago? Of course not. So frequency of election can help in that removal of the tainted and cleansing of corruption. But if you don't have inalienable rights of the people, if you don't have those being defended and those existing and some system for enforcing those, then your frequency of elections doesn't matter. So yes, it would be more helpful if Keir Starmer had only 3 years before he had to face election again. But it's not a guarantee that the system will work.
The parliamentary system, I think, has a huge flaw. The United States has kind of more of a federalist system, so the states have more rights reserved to them, and we also have this kind of more division of power. And so sometimes things are feckless and misguided, federally and so forth. But it doesn't quite have the overreach that I think we see in some of the parliamentary systems.
Yeah, see, I mean, they're again, I don't like to kind of get into a kind of pissing contest of who has the most tyranny, but look at the J6 protesters and what was done to them. Look at the fact that the mother of a slain protester can be arrested in the United States of America, supposedly the home of the free, for holding a candlelit vigil for her slain daughter. And no one will ever face, by the look of it, punishment for that murder.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm not dismissing constitutional protections. I'm not saying that the system of checks and balances isn't a good thing. I'm saying it's already been broken. The Constitution is already ignored. Most constitutional protections aren't being effective anymore because you have crooked media, crooked judges, and you have large parts of the Republican Party shrinking, but large parts of the Republican Party who are prepared to go along with the Democrats in enacting tyranny. So that kind of uniparty reality, and the corruption of the judiciary in particular, and the media, has enabled a level of tyranny, even though you've got these supposed protections in place. And I don't think that there's a big gap between the tyranny in the UK and the tyranny in the US at the moment. I think the whole Western world is under effective tyranny at the moment, and that's the issue. Patriots in all of these nations and people who love freedom in all these nations need to unite against it. And, the encouraging thing in America, I think, is that you're getting people from, the traditional left doing that. You're getting people like Tulsi Gabbard, and you're getting people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., realizing that the state of freedom and the perils to freedom in the US is now so advanced that they have to unite behind Trump. And, you know, that's the most encouraging thing of recent years.
Yeah. No, it's a classic liberal. You know, it's kind of funny. I mean, liberalism has really verged from that. You know, they you're probably a little better versed in this, but you know, the idea of liberal was to preserve freedom based on the word.
Yeah.
And citizens had to learn the trivium, which was not trivial, I guess, in order to become adequate citizens to maintain liberty. And you know, I don't know how liberals got that term, but they don't seem to really live up to it. Like Democrats don't really, you know, in a sense, they're not really that Democrat.
No, and they end up using the words for the opposite of what they are. You know, that they end up, because they've got this kind of Marxist influence and heritage in what they are as well. And that's become the dominant heritage of the modern liberal. They end up deeply illiberal because, of course, that's a totalitarian ideology, and it's an ideology that accepts no dissent. So yeah, the kind of the modern liberal is the opposite of the classical liberal. Well, I kind of think we should start talking about Stalmerism, which is like Stalinism, but with a soy-based diet and more rainbows.
Well, yeah, I think that the Austrian painter was a vegetarian, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Yeah, he would have fitted in nicely.
Yeah, let people see the pristine clarity of Jutlandia. And are you actually selling visas and passports, immigration?
No, I wish I was. Yeah, it may get to the point where I declare my flat an independent nation, but it's a small flat, so I'm going to have even stricter immigration laws than I would have over the nation.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so I saw this clip of a guy going around the UK to one of these refugee rallies, pro-refugee rallies, and he's like, all right, can I sign you up to take in one of the refugees at your home?
Yeah, I've seen that.
I rent, and it's like the ones who want to. Well, I own my place, but it's small.
Yeah. Not one of them. He couldn't find one of them that was willing to actually take a refugee. Funny that, isn't it?
It is crazy. So last thing, just if people want to help support my video cast and help me maybe get better internet here or something.
Yeah.
Or some kind of prophylaxis, they can buy my book. It's Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. And I actually have in audience here somebody who's actually read the book. And we have a screenplay we have not managed to launch. I want to talk maybe offline about that. Maybe I can get an animated version of it. Daniel's a great writer, and he is up for hire to a certain extent. I get it. But people should read Jutlandia.
Yes, I'm the oldest cliche there is, an impoverished writer, so.
Well, they don't always stay that way. I mean, writers, ask George Martin and Stephen King. You hit the right combo. Who knows?
Yeah.
You have a lottery chance. But I really, I say this, I love your writing. You write impactfully, wisely and humorously simultaneously, and a lot of heart and verve. And I knew of you before I knew of you because you wrote under pseudonym for a good length of time, and you were one of the bright lights of the dark times. And so
thank you. That's very kind, Randy. Thank you.
Well, it's absolutely true, and I hope it doesn't continue. I hope that the brightness of your light is kind of blended into the general brightness of our times, so that we don't need you.
Yes, yeah, that would be good. I'd love to be redundant in that sense, rather than in the just economic sense.
Yeah, no, I'll be a better
Yeah, and I can recommend your book as well. It's like let's pat each other on the back here, and it's a very interesting case of something that happened before COVID that maybe told us COVID was coming.
Yeah, I know. Had people anyway? Have people been aware of this kind of crazy phenomenon of unfortunately you're sitting down, of bureaucrats lying to people?
Yeah, astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, they might have been a little bit more wary of the next one, but who knows? H.L. Mencken in the 1920s, he said, democracy is the system by which people vote for what they want, and they deserve to get it good and hard.
Yeah, but I should probably say just before we go, my latest piece, it talks about how democracy is more than just one person, one vote, and it's not the tyranny of the majority; it's the spirit of liberty as well. And you can't have one without the other. A democracy with no spirit of liberty is not a proper democracy. And and that's all based around the protection of the inalienable rights of the people, and that's what the Constitution and the founders got so right. But like lots of Americans have that kind of same distrust of the word democracy. We shouldn't distrust it. We should distrust the way our current leaders use it when they don't feel it.
All right, lovely. So I'm going to end on that. Thank you so much, Daniel, for being on. And good luck to you once this is out in the social media world.
Cheers. I'll have to pick up my kids shortly, so I'll have to say goodbye and then rush off.